Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
The evening had settled into that specific kind of quiet that feels earned. Outside, a gentle rain whispered against the window panes, a soothing percussion to the silence within the house. I was in my favorite armchair, the leather worn smooth over years of use, a half-read book resting on my chest. The air smelled of old paper, and the faint, lingering scent of the lemon tea Adeline had made earlier. It was a peaceful evening, almost aggressively ordinary, a small, perfect slice of the life I had so carefully built. And then the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly, neighborly chime. It was persistent, an impatient finger held down on the button, a shrill, unwelcome intrusion into my sanctuary. I sighed, marking my page. Adeline was upstairs, probably running a bath. Who could it be at this hour? A package delivered late, a canvasser who didn't know when to quit? The ringing stopped, only to be replaced by a single, solid knock. It had a weight to it, a sense of finality that sent a strange, cold prickle up my spine. I moved to the door, my contentment from moments before evaporating into a cloud of mild annoyance and inexplicable apprehension. When I turned the knob and pulled the heavy oak door inward, I was met not by a delivery driver or a politician, but by a man who seemed to be held together by pure tension. He was tall, with broad shoulders that were slumped forward as if carrying a physical, tangible burden. His trench coat was damp from the rain, and his knuckles were white where he gripped the strap of a messenger bag. But it was his eyes that held me. They were weary, shadowed, and they darted everywhere but my face, as though concealing a truth too heavy to bear. The initial silence was broken only by the man's labored breathing and the drumming of the rain on the porch roof. He seemed to be gathering the courage to say something significant, his chest rising and falling in ragged waves. I, not understanding the reason for this unexpected and unsettling visit, simply waited. Finally, he took a deep, shuddering breath, and his eyes, for the first time, locked onto mine. They were filled with a chaotic mixture of guilt, anguish, and a desperate sort of resolve. "I'm Spencer," he blurted out, the name tumbling from his lips like a rock. He paused, as if letting the name settle in the air between us. Then came the words that fractured my world. "I'm your wife's lover." Those words, so loaded and so raw, didn't just hang in the air, they sucked the oxygen out of it. The rain, the ticking grandfather clock in the hall, the scent of my tea, it all vanished. The world stopped spinning, leaving only me and this man standing in the middle of a silent, emotional void. My mind refused to process it. It felt like a line from a bad movie, a clumsy, melodramatic plot point that had no place in the quiet, stable script of my life. I could only blink, my brain struggling to connect his statement to the woman I knew, the woman upstairs humming softly in the bath. "Adeline. My Adeline," Spencer continued, his voice trembling as though each sentence was a forced confession dragged from the depths of his soul. "I'm here because I can't endure it anymore. Adeline, your wife and I, we've been together for 3 years. 3 years. The phrase wasn't just a measure of time, it was an invisible blade that cut through me, severing the past from the present. A surge of heat rose in my chest, a hot, liquid anger, but it was immediately encased in ice. I remained motionless, my face a mask of neutrality I didn't know I was capable of wearing. My mind, now a frantic storm of disbelief and pain, forced my body into a state of unnatural calm. I found myself analyzing every detail of the man in front of me, a stranger who claimed to know my wife more intimately than I did. His fists were clenched, but not in a threatening way. They were clenched in frustration, in self-loathing. "She always tells me she's going to leave you," he choked out, his gaze finally dropping to the welcome mat at his feet. "She says she's miserable, that she's just waiting for the right time, but she never does anything. I can't live in this limbo anymore. You need to know. I deserve for you to know." The weight of his words began to unfold in my mind, which was now throbbing with a dull ache. 3 years. The marriage I believed to be solid, the partnership I thought was built on trust and shared history, suddenly seemed like a facade, a carefully constructed stage play where I was the only one who didn't know my lines were a lie. All of Adeline's excuses, every late night at the office, every business trip to a conference I'd never heard of, every work dinner that stretched into the early morning, they were all taking on a new, sinister meaning. They were weaving together a secret history of my own life, a story I had never even considered. Even so, I remained silent, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "I left my wife for her," Spencer confessed, his voice faltering, breaking on the admission. The confession was a desperate plea for validation, for his sacrifice to mean something. "I believed her when she said she loved me, that she was unhappy with you. I believed she would make a decision. But now it seems I was as deceived as you." The words, "as deceived as you," hit me hard. They were meant to create a bond, a shared victimhood, but I refused to let him see the wound. My pride, a stubborn and foolish thing, made me maintain an almost unshakable expression. I knew that exploding, That screaming or attacking this man wouldn't change the facts. It wouldn't rewind time. The betrayal was here, standing on my doorstep, dripping rain onto my porch. I needed to figure out what to do with it. "So, what do you want from me now?" I finally asked. My voice was firm but low, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. My question seemed to catch him off guard. He hesitated, searching for words that didn't come. He had rehearsed his confession, but not the aftermath. What did he want? Absolution? Permission? For me to do the dirty work he couldn't convince Adeline to do? "I want the truth," he said at last, his voice barely a whisper. "I want to know if she really plans to leave you. Because if she doesn't, I need to move on." I studied him for a long moment. He looked like a broken person, a man who had anchored his entire existence to an illusion for far too long. In that instant, a strange thing happened. The anger churning in my gut was tempered by a sliver of something that felt dangerously close to pity. We were two strangers bound by the same lie. Two men standing on opposite sides of a chasm Adeline had dug between us. But one thing was clear. I wouldn't trust anyone else to resolve this for me. "I'll find out the truth, Spencer," I said, and my voice carried a cold determination that made him avert his eyes. "Not for you, for me." With nothing more to say, I slowly, deliberately, closed the door. The latch clicked shut, a sound that felt as final as a gavel in a courtroom. I left him outside in the rain while my mind began to process the crushing weight of that conversation. When the door was finally shut, I leaned my back against it, feeling the solid wood press into my spine. My world, which had been spinning in a disoriented way, slowly came to a halt. I looked around the living room, at the space that just minutes before had represented comfort, stability, and love. Now, every object felt cold and distant, artifacts from a different life, a life I no longer recognized. The framed photo on the mantelpiece, Adeline and I on our anniversary, her head resting on my shoulder, both of us smiling, seemed to mock me. It was a perfect portrait of a perfect lie. I knew that conversation was only the beginning. The hole I'd fallen into was deeper than I could have imagined. I walked upstairs, my feet heavy as lead. Adeline was out of the bath, wrapped in a fluffy white robe, humming as she brushed her hair. She looked up and smiled, the same warm, effortless smile she had given me for a decade. "Who was that at this hour, honey?" she asked, her voice light and unconcerned. 1,000 responses burned on my tongue. "It was your lover. It was the man you've been lying to me with for 3 years." But I swallowed them all down. I couldn't confront her like this. Not based on the word of a desperate stranger. I needed more. I needed control. "Nobody," I replied, my voice shockingly steady. "Just a wrong address." She accepted it without a second thought and went back to her humming. The ease with which she believed my lie was, in itself, a new kind of torture. That night was the longest of my life. I lay beside her in our bed, the familiar scent of her shampoo filling my senses, and felt utterly alone. I could feel the warmth of her body next to mine, yet she had never felt farther away. Spencer's words echoed in my mind endlessly. 3 years. As deceived as you, everything I thought I knew about our marriage, about her, about us, was collapsing. By the time the first gray light of dawn filtered through the blinds, I had made my decision. I couldn't ignore what I'd heard. I needed answers that Adeline, in her comfortable deception, would never provide. But I knew I couldn't just confront her without proof. A cornered person will say anything to escape. So, I began to do something I never imagined I would. I began to investigate my own wife. At first, it felt profoundly wrong, a violation of the trust I thought we shared. For years, I had trusted Adeline without hesitation. But now, I saw signs where I once saw normalcy. I started noticing the little things I used to ignore, the digital breadcrumbs of a secret life. It was the way she angled her phone away from me when a text came in, a subtle, almost unconscious gesture. It was the brief, knowing smile that would touch her lips before she quickly typed a reply. It was the phone calls she'd take in the other room, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's just my sister," she'd say, or "just a quick call for work." Every detail that would have gone unnoticed before now seemed loaded with meaning, each one a small, sharp stab of confirmation. I felt like a thief in my own life, hunting for clues to a crime I was the victim of. The discomfort was immense, but my need for the unvarnished truth was stronger. It was on a Wednesday night that I found my first piece of concrete evidence. Adeline was in the shower, the sound of running water a steady hum in the background. She had left her phone on the nightstand. Usually, it was locked, always. But tonight, for some reason, a moment of carelessness, perhaps the screen was dark but unlocked. It was an opportunity I knew I wouldn't get again. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands felt cold and clammy. This felt like the ultimate betrayal of privacy, a line I never thought I'd cross. But Spencer's face, etched with despair, flashed in my mind. 3 years. I picked up the phone. With trembling fingers, I opened her messages. I scrolled through trivial conversations with her mother, group chats from work, appointment reminders. Then, one stood out. It was from a contact saved only as Sterling. The most recent message, sent just that afternoon, read, "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I love when you wear that red dress." My stomach turned to ice. Sterling? Who the hell was Sterling? The name didn't fit. My mind was already struggling to process the idea of Spencer, the heartbroken man who had confessed on my porch, and now there was someone else? The scope of her deceit was expanding, becoming a monstrous, multifaceted thing I couldn't comprehend. Was Spencer just one of them? Was he even the main one? The questions multiplied, each one more painful than the last. Adeline came out of the shower a few minutes later, wrapped in a towel, her face flushed from the steam. I could barely look at her. I placed the phone back on the nightstand exactly as I'd found it. Her every move now felt rehearsed, full of a calculated deceit. She was performing in a play, and I was the only one in the audience who knew it was all fake. The next day, I made a decision that sealed the fate of my marriage. I called in sick to work, and I followed her. The guilt was a heavy cloak on my shoulders. I felt like a stalker, a paranoid husband from a cheap thriller. But my need for the truth, the whole, ugly truth, was a fire in my gut that burned away all other feelings. Adeline left work at the end of the day, just as she always did. But instead of heading home, she drove downtown to an upscale restaurant, the kind of place you go for celebrations and clandestine meetings. I parked at a safe distance across the street and went in soon after her, staying hidden behind a large marble column near the entrance. And that's when I saw her. She was seated at a corner table, bathed in the soft, intimate glow of a candle. And across from her sat a man I had never seen before. He was elegant, well-dressed in a tailored suit, exuding an aura of wealth and confidence. He looked nothing like the emotionally ravaged Spencer. This had to be Sterling. They were laughing together, their heads close. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She didn't pull away. They looked like two people deeply in love, oblivious to the world around them. Still hiding, my body rigid with a mixture of rage and grief, I took out my phone. My hand shook so badly the first few pictures were blurry. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and captured the images that would destroy any lingering hope that this was all a misunderstanding. The photos were sharp, clear, and damning. Adeline, my wife, leaning across the table, touching another man's hand, her face lit up with a joy I hadn't seen in years. I wanted to march right up to that table, to shatter their perfect little bubble and confront them both. But I knew it wasn't the right moment. I needed to think clearly, and above all, I needed more information. After about an hour, they left the restaurant. I followed them at a safe distance, my emotions on a tight leash. They walked to his car, a sleek, black Mercedes, and she got in without hesitation. They drove off together to an address I didn't recognize, a modern apartment building in a fashionable part of the city. I parked across the street and watched them get out, laughing as they walked into the lobby, his arm draped possessively around her waist. In that moment, watching them disappear into the building, I felt the ground fall away beneath my feet. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the picture they formed was more devastating than I could have ever imagined. Spencer was just one piece of the truth. Sterling was another. How many more were there? I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The pain in my chest was almost physical, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. But more than anything, I felt a cold, chilling clarity. This was far from over. I had to keep going. I had to see this through to the end. Later that night, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Every move Adeline made seemed like a carefully rehearsed performance, and I was the unwilling audience of a cruel play. She came home around 10, claiming a client dinner ran late. She smiled, talked about trivial things, even asked about my day at work as if nothing was wrong. Her normalcy was a form of psychological warfare. For me, everything was wrong. The very air in the house felt thick with her lies. I knew I couldn't delay the confrontation any longer. I couldn't spend another night lying next to her, pretending. I needed to hear it from her own lips. I needed to put an end to this charade. After dinner, while she settled on the couch to watch television, I took a deep breath and went over to her. My hands were cold and my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I couldn't back down. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was steady, but it was heavy with a seriousness I couldn't hide. She looked up at me, surprised but not immediately suspicious. "Sure. About what?" I didn't answer with words. I unlocked my phone, opened the photo gallery, and placed it on the coffee table, sliding it toward her. The images spoke for themselves. There she was with Sterling at the restaurant laughing, touching his hand. There was the final, damning shot of them entering the apartment building together. Her face went pale, all the color drained from it, leaving behind a waxy, translucent mask. Her eyes darted from the photos to my face, and back again. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen. "Well?" I asked, crossing my arms, and looking her directly in the eye. My calm demeanor seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting would have. "Don't you have anything to say?" She swallowed hard, her eyes brimming with tears. "Elias, it's not what it looks like." The sheer, unadulterated cliché of it almost made me laugh. It was a laugh without humor, a bitter, hollow sound. "Not what it looks like?" I repeated, my voice turning colder. "Then please, explain. Explain exactly what this is, because I'm having a very hard time understanding." She tried to pull herself together, but her facade had already cracked beyond repair. "Sterling is just a friend. I swear, we've met a few times because he needed advice. Work stuff." The excuses sounded empty even to her own ears. She knew it. I knew it, but I had another card up my sleeve, the one that had started this whole nightmare. "And Spencer?" I asked, my voice dropping lower. "Is he just a friend, too? Because he showed up here last week, Adeline. He stood right on our doorstep and told me he's been your lover for 3 years. Mentioning Spencer's name hit her like a physical blow. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. All composure vanished. She broke down completely, burying her face in her hands as deep, racking sobs shook her body. "I don't know what to say," she murmured between sobs. "I've done terrible things. But I never wanted it to be this way. I never wanted to hurt you." "You never wanted to hurt me?" I shot back, the bitter edge in my voice now sharp as a razor. "You didn't just hurt me, Adeline. You destroyed what we had. You annihilated it. And what's the deal with Sterling? Is it the same thing you had with Spencer? Or are there others I don't know about? Is our entire marriage just a collection of your sordid little affairs?" My words left her at a loss. She slowly shook her head, as though trying to organize the chaos in her mind. "I can't explain it. It's like I need something I can't seem to find. Something to fill this emptiness inside me. I love you, Elias. I do, but I don't know what's wrong with me." I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch and speak for itself. Her tears, her confession of emptiness, it all felt like a desperate, last-ditch effort to make herself the victim. Finally, I answered with an almost unsettling calm. "Adeline, this isn't about what's wrong with you, it's about what you chose to do. You made choices. Every day, for 3 years, you chose to lie to me. And I can't do this anymore. We're done." I wasn't expecting an answer, and I didn't wait for one. She tried to protest, to say my name through her tears, but I simply stood up and left the room. I left her alone with her sobs and her regrets and the damning evidence of her choices glowing on the coffee table. I knew my own pain wouldn't end there, but it was the beginning of the end of our ruined relationship. It was the first step toward reclaiming myself from the rubble. The next morning, after the confrontation, I woke up feeling a strange combination of profound relief and utter exhaustion. There was something liberating about the finality of my decision, about speaking the truth that had been poisoning me from the inside out. But the pain of betrayal was a physical thing, a dull, persistent ache in my chest. I knew the story didn't end with Adeline's tears. She might have admitted part of the truth, but I needed to fill in the gaps. I needed to close every door, sever every tie. That meant dealing with Spencer. He had also been deceived, played for a fool just as I had been. For a moment, I wasn't sure whether I felt sympathy or disgust for him. He had, after all, willingly participated in the destruction of my marriage. He wasn't an innocent party, but he was a part of this tangled mess, and he deserved to know the full shape of the lie he had invested 3 years of his life in. Determined to get everything straight, I picked up my phone and revisited the photos of Adeline and Sterling. I compiled the clearest images into a message for Spencer. For a moment, I hesitated. Sending those images was like dropping a bomb on what was left of his life, but the truth, I had decided, had to be shared. It was the only antiseptic for a wound this deep. I typed a short, direct message. "You weren't the only one. I hope this helps you see things more clearly." I attached the photos and hit send. The action felt cold, surgical. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. Spencer had replied. "What does this mean? Who is that guy?" I sighed and answered calmly, my thumbs moving with a steady purpose. "His name is Sterling. Another one of her lovers, apparently. Adeline fooled more people than just you and me." It wasn't long before the phone rang, displaying Spencer's name. I thought about ignoring it, but I knew I had to see this through. I picked up. "Is this real?" he asked, his voice filled with a desperate, cracking disbelief. "Are these pictures real?" I answered bluntly, leaving no room for doubt. "I don't gain anything by making this up. She cheated on me with you, and with him. Maybe with others, I don't know. You weren't special, Spencer. You were just another piece in her game." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. When he spoke again, he sounded like a man drowning. "I left my wife for her, Elias. I threw everything away because I believed her promises. How could she do this?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own emotions in check. "Welcome to the club," I said, my voice flat. "But unlike you, I won't let her keep making the rules. My marriage is over, Spencer. And from where I stand, your relationship with her should be over, too." He abruptly hung up. I had a feeling that conversation wasn't the end of it, and I was right. A few hours later, fueled by a mixture of rage and heartbreak, Spencer took a step that changed the course of his own life. He went to confront Adeline. I learned about it later, in a series of frantic, rambling texts from him. He had gone to our house that same evening. When Adeline opened the door and saw him, her face tensed up. He held out his phone, showing her the same photos I had sent him. "Who was he, Adeline? Who was Sterling? How much more did you lie to me?" She tried to defend herself, but her words were jumbled, making no sense. Spencer, however, was done listening to excuses. He told me he looked at her with a mix of anger and sorrow and said, "You made me destroy my life for something that was never real. I believed you, Adeline. And all you did was play with everyone's feelings." For the first time, she didn't try to justify herself. She just lowered her head in silence. Spencer realized there was nothing more to say. He left her there, on the porch of the house that was no longer my home, and walked away with a heavy heart, but with the certainty that he needed to move on. The next day, he tried returning to his old life. He called his ex-wife, the woman he had left for Adeline. Her response, he told me in a final, defeated message, was harsh but fair. "You made your choice, Spencer," she had said firmly. "And now I'm moving on. I hope you do the same." Alone and broken, Spencer realized he had lost everything. His marriage, his family, even the illusion of a future with Adeline. He wasn't just a victim of her lies, but also of his own actions. In that moment, he began to face the consequences of his mistakes. Meanwhile, I watched it all unfold from a distance with a bittersweet feeling. I had lost so much, but at the same time, I felt I'd finally regained control over my own life. Adeline, on the other hand, grew increasingly isolated, left to confront the fallout of her betrayals as everyone around her finally moved on. The days after that final, chaotic series of confrontations were quiet, but it was a heavy, reflective quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of wreckage that I now had to navigate. I was determined to move forward, but that didn't mean it would be easy. The betrayal had left deep scars, and I knew I would need time to process everything. An unexpected call from Spencer one morning seemed like one last piece that needed to be put in its place. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct told me I needed to close this final chapter. When I picked up, his voice sounded different. It was less angry, less frustrated, and more resigned. "Elias," he began awkwardly, I just wanted to say thank you." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "You opened my eyes," he said, his voice quiet. "You showed me who Adeline really is, and, well, who I became by getting involved in all of this. I'm not sure how I let myself get this far, but now I want to do what's right." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. I recognized the remorse in his voice, the sound of a man who had hit rock bottom and was finally looking up. But I also knew I couldn't forget what he represented. He was a living symbol of my marriage's failure. "Spencer, I hope in some way I helped you see things," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But honestly, I don't want any connection with you." He was silent on the other end, caught off guard by my frankness. "Don't take it personally," I continued, needing to make it clear. "You cheated on your wife. You helped destroy my marriage, and I am making a conscious choice not to have people like that in my life. You chose this path, and now you have to face the consequences alone. Good luck, Spencer. Move on." Before he could answer, I ended the call. I felt a mix of relief and clarity. It was a necessary ending, a final break, not just from Adeline, but from everything that dark phase of my life represented. I was drawing a line in the sand. On one side was the wreckage. On the other was whatever came next. The following months brought gradual but significant changes. I moved out of the house we had shared and found a smaller apartment downtown, a place that held no memories, no ghosts. I settled into a new routine, one more aligned with what really mattered to me. Without the constant presence of conflict and suspicion, my home, once a place of tension, became a space of tranquility. I spent time taking care of myself. I started reading again, devouring books with a passion I thought I had lost. I started each day with a run along the river, feeling the freedom of the wind on my face as I left every piece of the past behind me with each stride. Little by little, I noticed that the emotional weight I carried was easing. I began smiling again, even if shyly at first. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years, admitting to them that I had been going through a difficult time. Their support, their simple, genuine friendship, was a balm to my wounded spirit. These small moments, sharing a beer with a friend, getting lost in a good book, feeling the satisfying burn in my muscles after a long run, reminded me that life still had plenty to offer. Every small step I took proved that I was rebuilding myself, at my own pace, but in a steady, deliberate way. Adeline tried reaching out to me once or twice, first through texts and then a long, rambling voicemail filled with apologies and pleas. I deleted them all without listening to the end. I knew our story was over, and any attempt to reconnect would only bring more pain. I had learned to set boundaries, not just with her, but with anything or anyone that might compromise my newfound peace. And so, I moved on. Not as a man defined by betrayal, but as someone who chose to start over. I learned that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But a person can heal, a life can be rebuilt, and in the quiet moments, when I sit in my new apartment watching the city lights twinkle below, I don't feel bitterness or regret. I feel a quiet sense of gratitude for the strength I didn't know I had, and a hopeful anticipation for the blank pages of the new chapter I was just beginning to write.